Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, January 10th, 2022. We're ready to kick off the second week of the year here. Like we do at the beginning of every week, what I want to do is spend a little bit more time scrutinizing that higher time frame, and then we'll dial down to those shorter. So let's jump up, take a look at our 3 month chart. We've been watching this 44.93, 50% of the previous 3 month candle. Still have not come back to test at least 50% of that right now. And there is, a lot of these major wicks to the upside, so definitely have some clues or potential indications that there is a little bit of weakness in the market as they try to continue to push strong like this. So remember, if these two candles, if this candle closes the way it looks now, we now have two pretty indecisive looking candles. So just something to keep in mind from that higher time frame perspective. And outside of the wicks that we see off the top end, everything else looks pretty strong, right? We don't have any signs of exhaustion from a divergence perspective. In fact, everything just looks pretty normal. And, they are still, for whatever it's worth, they are still green candles for now. So let's go ahead and jump down to our monthly. And this, remember last week, even though we didn't spend a lot of time in the mornings, going over these higher time frames, we basically said our monthly, our weekly, and our daily were all showing pretty clear bearish signals from the highs that I mentioned to everybody we should probably just kind of keep in mind. Even though the bulls always seem to jump back in, we do have pretty clear high time frame indications for some type of pullback or major sell-off. And so we kind of mentioned it every morning. We said, monthly, weekly, daily, all showing the potential bearishness from the highs. So that's something to keep in mind. But then on the pullback, we said we did have, I believe, a weekly and a monthly bullish signal on the pullback. So the question was who was going to win out, and were we going to continue to push, or was the market actually going to follow through from all the bearish signals we saw up top? So let's look at the monthly really quickly here. We'll zoom in, and back in December, I'm pretty sure as this was developing, as this monthly candle in December was developing, we noticed that the lows were showing a potential bullish divergence. So that was one thing we were noticing. The other thing was we did have that bearish divergence from the all-time high, although that new candle, the December candle we were watching, did kind of peak above that and kind of negate that high. But coming into January here, we still have this push to higher highs in the market, but the RVI is continuing to push lower and lower, right? So that was what we were watching up top. And same thing again on the weekly over here, maybe a little bit more of a close, higher resolution. Back at the end of December, we were watching that candle close coming into January, and we said we did have potential bearish divergence up there. So again, bearish off the highs, nice bullish divergence on the pullback. Who was going to win out up here, especially in this major consolidation up high? So sure enough, so far, we broke through the lows of that December 31st candle that closed at the end of the year, and we started a potential larger pullback. And then again on the daily, just to kind of go through some of the bearish signals we were watching, again on a little bit more resolution now than the weekly, we see here back December 28th, really clear bearish divergence. And I think I drew this on here, this red line here, and I'm pretty sure on that morning I said what we want to see on RVI is a push down like this, and then we would actually have a peak here, and it would be an argument for that bearish divergence. And if you look at the actual white line there, that's what ended up happening. So pretty much exactly what I drew there, unless that's something for this right here. So that must have been for this divergence right here. So forgive me. So we came back up, and this was right at the end of the year. Um, Came right back up to test the highs and got a very clear bearish divergence. And then from there we pulled back. Now, coming into the new year, in fact, coming into this must have been New Year's Eve. This is when we said we had that shallow pullback and a nice bullish divergence on the daily. So from there, we did get an attempt coming into the beginning of this year to push to new all-time highs, and we got it, but then that's when everything failed, right? So, and you can see off the high that we made again, we pushed higher to a new all-time high. Our RVI then either from the high back here came down, or this high right here for the double top did push lower from that peak as well, right? And then on this new high up here, what you would have heard me say if we were scrutinizing here midweek, I would have said we pushed to this new all-time high, we got a new high in price. This RVI right here, we need to have, come down like that so we actually have the peak. And I don't know if that ended up happening, so there you go. So there was an actual peak there. And then what we would have been watching for last week, and I mentioned, is these swing lows back here. Once these break, it's basically, on for the bears 100%. And so that low there was somewhere right around, what's the actual number? 47.50. Once we got through 47.50, it opened up a whole lot more on the downside. So got the breakthrough right through the bullish divergence where we saw it on the daily and the 4-hour there. And now, as you can see, we're retracing the leg. So that's kind of what we're looking at here on the high time frames. Now, there's one thing I did not mention, and that is if we look at, now the monthly doesn't have enough resolution to see the pullback here and have some type of low. What it has right now is that argument for the bearish divergence off the high. When we get to the weekly here on the pullback, now that we're getting this bearish follow through, we do have the argument for a bullish divergence as it pulls back here. So I'm going to be watching this throughout the week here. The key thing to keep in mind when you have this type of divergence set up here, for anyone who's really focusing on how to interpret these signals, keep in mind that this low back here at 45.20 quarter, price could pull back, and that's more than 100 points lower. So price could still come down 100 more points. And if the RVI is still lower than it was back here when we were down here at 45.20, we'll still have a bullish argument from that perspective. So that's not going to help us pinpoint a low. But remember, we try to watch this stuff because if we do start to get follow through, a daily and a weekly signal could be a clue for a much larger push. So we'll watch this on the weekly. Again, this is probably going to develop some more. So the odds of it just staying there and following through and getting the divergence maybe not as high, but we'll watch. And then on our daily, on the pullback, just like we said last week when we were down over here, we do have potential bullish divergence off the low. Of course, it was the same exact scenario as the weekly. We could potentially come all the way back down to that 45.20 quarter low. And if RVI is much lower down here, we would still have the same argument we have right now. So at the moment, it's not necessarily something to be very, very concerned with. And so this was back the other day. We still can draw it. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. Going into the 7th, and then here we are for Monday. We've pushed lower in price, but you could still argue from that previous swing low back here at 45.20 quarter that we do have that bullish divergence still there, right? So we're not going to be able to actually have a lot of faith that we're going to bounce out of here. But if things start to follow through and our shorter time frames have the same signal, we could potentially get that larger push from the lower at right now. So again, we'll just monitor it. It's not something I want to use as a signal to play at the moment. And those are our high time frames. So all very clear bearish stuff from the highs that we've been talking about for quite a while. In fact, it's been, I'd say, pretty much for the last few weeks here, we've been watching the bearish stuff off the highs, and I've been kind of telling everybody there are a lot of hints for the bears here. So we'll see if this is finally it. 4,800 is the biggest extent we get up, and now we're going to get some type of retracement. Who knows? So let's go down to the shorter time frames now, go into the intraday, and see if we can find some interesting areas to play this morning. Our 4 hour, you can see we look at this retracement of this leg here. We're pulling back right into the 61.8 right now. In fact, that level is just about 46.30 quarter, and the overnight low so far is 46.31 quarter, so we're just 1 point in front of the 61.8 retracement. I don't necessarily see anything, at least from up on the 4 hour here, I don't see anything lining up too sexy with that level necessarily, but we do have that just a point below the overnight low so far. And then a little bit deeper, and we'll talk about this on the shorter time frames, we'll pull back right into that previous resistance down at 46.01, and maybe even arguably just in front of it, the swing high up at, what's the number, 0650. So if this continues to pull back and break, you can see we highlighted this area right in here around 21 to 24. Getting through all that is going to open up a test of that previous structure up there. And from this 4 hour perspective, I don't see anything too important from a divergence perspective. We did have that potential bullish divergence last week that we talked about. Again, not having a lot of faith in it, but something we were watching. And again, there wasn't much follow through, and we got this pullback. Now, something to note about what we just did here in the overnight session. So maybe what I'll do here, I'll go down to the 60-minute so we can see it a little bit clearer. And that is, if we look at the previous daily price action, which was Friday of last week, we have a high up here at 47, I believe it's 06 even, 0575. We have a low from Friday of 46.5375, and 50% of that range was 46.7975. So that's our purple line, our 50% line for this morning. And look at what they did in the overnight session, right? So coming into the overnight, had you been watching the market, that 79.75 sitting there should have kind of been maybe the first indication to you that maybe the bulls were going to be strong if they could get through there in our overnight session here from Sunday. But look what ended up happening. They came right into it. Maybe broke it by, looks like 2 points. So a little 2 point peak above. And then from there we failed, and we did have some pretty good bearish divergences up there, including on the 60-minute here and on the 4 hour as well. Right, so we held 50% of the previous day, and now we're playing around in this lower end of Friday's range, right? So the important thing this morning, if the bulls are going to be strong, they're going to get some type of push out of this area and get through our two lines, our first two lines in the sand, 69 being the first, 79 being the second, and then getting through the previous daily high, the next most important thing before there's any kind of faith in some type of bullish move here. Now, in the most ideal sense, they'll get through the high that we made just a couple days before that up here at 47.1575, and that would be kind of the ideal situation there, because we would break that most important previous high, which would be a clue for an actual change in trend, for a potential push up to test the all-time high again. But until that starts to occur, things are still looking pretty bearish here. So from the 60-minute perspective, we came in here and we highlighted some interesting levels to watch if they do sell off. And remember, we talked about this swing low back here, just about 46.22 quarter. What's that number? Yeah, 22 quarter, and it might be a little range there of about a point or two. And then we had this previous resistance up here right around 42.50 as again another potential area to see the bulls jump in, but they are just, and like I said, when you have a sell-off, they typically will just go ahead and disrespect these levels and just chug on through. So that's so far, that seems to be what they're doing. But we do have that little section down there right around 46, 21, 22 to maybe 23 area as a potential. And then a little bit deeper is going to bring us right into this zone right here. We put this eye level on here last week. I believe in our training session when we were talking about power levels, eye levels, and how we draw them. So we have this line up in here right around 05 quarter. What's the number? 0575. So we've got 0575 and then we have this line at 4650. So pretty much this little 5-point range right here, an area that would also make sense for the bulls to hold if they can get through that 22 and 23 area. I'm not saying that you should just blindly buy that area, but that might be a good target to the downside. If we do find a short in here this morning, if it makes sense in the context of the open there, this would be probably one of my larger targets to the downside, especially considering that we're right around 46.30, so that's a good 25-point push down. So that would be a good larger target, and again, an area that I wouldn't be surprised to see a bounce out of. So I would be definitely taking some profit just in front of there. And then if that can't hold, that's opening up a big push down to another potentially 30, 40, 50 points lower. So I don't see anything from this kind of mid time frame here of anything else that piques my interest outside of the regions that we just talked about. So we got that one there. We've got this one down here. And then we do have that last little area around 21, 22, 23 here that very well could hold for some type of bounce. Now, things obviously look very, very bearish here. So the idea is probably to continue to ride this guy down. But remember, anything's possible. We could open in this market here and see some type of really strong rally. So if there is a really strong rally, we'll just have to go ahead and jump on to the long side. But things definitely seem pretty bearish. I don't really have, well, let's take a look at it really quickly. We're getting closer to the open here. Looking at the pullback now that we're doing, this retracement of the whole leg that you can't see, the retracement of this whole leg up. I want to take a look at these lows one last time on pretty much every time frame. So remember, our weekly and our daily definitely show that there's divergence. If we were to just hold where we are right now and bounce out, and our signals look like they do when the candles close on the daily and the weekly, we do have the argument for a bullish divergence. On the 4-hour, I think it's starting to get, there's an argument that could be made. Again, if they start to just rip out of this, we now have 4-hour daily and potentially weekly bullish divergence from the lower at. And then I think you could argue on our 60-minute, our 30-minute, and I think even the 10-minute, that there's even a bullish divergence from the current overnight low as well. So again, we have a confluence from the overnight low. The thing is we're in a bearish market. So we would need to see some really strong follow through here. But I think the key thing I want to keep in the back of my head is if we do start to get some pretty good follow through, the potential of all those time frames closing with a bullish signal, the potential for that push back up is there, right? So we're going to have to see what the market participants do here coming out of the open. And if we really do start to get a strong push, we can get through 46.50, we can get through the KP around 57, and then again we can get through 69 and 79. Those would be kind of the ideal things to see to have any type of faith in a bullish push this morning. And if that starts to happen, we'll go ahead and look for those trades to the upside. Otherwise, we're probably going to expect a pullback if they can't hold down into one of the regions we talked about earlier. So that's where we'll leave it for everybody, and we're going to jump down to our member section here and start looking for some potential trades on the short time frames here. So have a great rest of your day to everyone else watching out there on YouTube land.